There is a particular kind of weight that comes with knowing, from the moment you are old enough to understand anything at all, that your entire life has already been assigned a destination. Most people spend years, sometimes decades, trying to figure out what they are supposed to do with themselves, what their purpose is, where they belong in the world. Prince William never had that problem, and depending on how you look at it, that is either an extraordinary privilege or an extraordinary burden. Probably it is both, simultaneously, in ways that are impossible to fully separate. He was born on the 21st of June 1982, the first child of the Prince and Princess of Wales, and from that first day, the shape of his future was already determined in its broad outlines. He would be king. Everything else, every choice he made, and every relationship he formed, and every experience he had, would exist in relationship to that central fact. What makes William's road to the throne genuinely interesting, genuinely worth examining in detail, is not the destination. The destination was never in serious doubt, barring the kind of catastrophic personal failure or constitutional crisis that nobody was seriously expecting. What makes it interesting is the journey, and specifically, the way that journey has been shaped by forces and events and relationships that nobody planned and nobody could have anticipated. Because the path from the child born in the private wing of St. Mary's Hospital in Paddington to the man who will one day be King William V of the United Kingdom has run through some of the most turbulent and painful and publicly examined territory in the history of the modern monarchy. And the person who has emerged from that journey is considerably more complex and considerably more interesting than the carefully managed public image sometimes suggests. The early years were, in many ways, the last period of genuine normality that William would ever experience. His parents were still together, at least formally, and the family was living at Kensington Palace in circumstances that were, by the standards of the British aristocracy, relatively contained. Diana was determined that her children would have as normal a childhood as the constraints of their position allowed. She took them to McDonald's and to amusement parks. She enrolled William in a local nursery school rather than immediately handing him over to private tutors. She was physically affectionate with them in public in ways that were not conventional for parents of their background, and that attracted considerable comment at the time, most of it positive. There are photographs from this period that capture something genuine and unguarded. A mother with her small son, both of them looking like people rather than symbols. And those photographs have an entirely different quality from the stiff, formal portraits that represent the monarchy in its more traditional mode. The contrast between Diana's approach to parenting and the approach that had characterized previous generations of the royal family was real and significant, and it shaped William in ways that are still visible in the adult he became. The emotional directness that Diana modeled, the willingness to show feeling and to prioritize human connection over institutional propriety, left a mark on both her sons. But it also put them in a difficult position as they grew older, because the institution they were being prepared to serve operated according to quite different principles of emotional restraint and public composure, and the subordination of personal feeling to institutional duty. Learning to navigate between those two sets of values, to honor what their mother had given them while also meeting the demands of what they were being trained to become, has been one of the central challenges of William's adult life. The marriage of Charles and Diana deteriorated through the second half of the 1980s and collapsed publicly in the early 1990s, and William was old enough to understand at least some of what was happening. He was 10 when his parents formally separated in 1992, 13 when the divorce was finalized in 1996. The experience of watching two people he loved tear each other apart in full view of the entire world, with every development reported and analyzed and photographed and discussed in terms that mixed genuine public interest with something considerably less dignified, was formative in ways that are hard to overstate. It gave him an early and very direct education in the relationship between private experience and public perception, in the gap between how things look from the outside and what is actually happening on the inside. It also gave him a healthy wariness of media intrusion that has never entirely left him and that has informed some of the most significant decisions of his adult life. Diana's death in the Paris car crash on the 31st of August 1997 was the defining event of William's childhood, and probably the defining event of his life up to that point and possibly beyond it. He was 15 years old. He had been at Balmoral with his father and his brother when the news came. The grief was private and immediate and enormous, and then almost immediately it was also public, because the death of Diana was not just a family event, it was a national and international event of staggering proportions, and the family's grief was being observed and judged and debated by people who felt, with some justification, that they had a stake in it. The criticism of the royal family's initial response to Diana's death, the perception that they were cold and distant at a moment that required warmth and public acknowledgement, landed partly on the shoulders of a 15-year-old boy who had just lost his mother and was being asked implicitly to perform his grief in ways that satisfied public expectation. That experience of having to manage the most private and devastating emotional experience imaginable while simultaneously being a public figure whose every appearance and expression was being analyzed by the world seems to have produced something very specific in William's character. A deep and genuine commitment to protecting his own private life and the lives of the people he loves from public exposure wherever it can be avoided. A clear-eyed understanding that the media's relationship with the royal family is fundamentally transactional rather than sympathetic. And a determination, when he eventually had children of his own, to do whatever was in his power to give them a childhood that was more protected than his own had been. These are not small things. They are commitments that have shaped major life decisions and that continue to shape the way he approaches his public role. Eton College, where William enrolled in 1995, was the setting for the next chapter. It was an environment that was, in its own way, almost perfectly designed to produce a certain kind of English public man, assured and capable and accustomed to a particular kind of privilege, but also genuinely educated in the broadest sense, exposed to history and ideas, and the company of people who would go on to occupy significant positions across British public life. William was by most accounts a good student rather than a brilliant one, more interested in the social and sporting dimensions of school life than in academic distinction for its own sake. He was popular with his peers in the uncomplicated way that comes naturally to people who are physically attractive and good at sports, and not obviously trying too hard. He played water polo. He was a good football player. He fit in without disappearing, which is not the easiest thing to manage when you are the future King of England, attending a school full of people who have been trained from birth not to be obviously impressed by anything. The gap year between Eton and university took him to Chile and Belize and various other places, and the time abroad seems to have been genuinely important in the way that formative travel experiences can be, exposing him to ways of living that were entirely outside the frame of reference he had grown up in, and giving him something of the perspective that comes from sustained exposure to difference. He has spoken about this period with what sounds like genuine warmth, and has credited it with teaching him things that more formal education could not have provided. The University of St. Andrews in Scotland, where he enrolled in 2001 to study history of art before switching to geography, was where the next major chapter of his life began, and specifically where the story of Catherine Middleton began. They met in their first year, lived in the same student residence, moved in overlapping social circles, and began a relationship that developed slowly and carefully over the years that followed. The relationship was not always smooth. There was a well-publicized period of separation in 2007 that generated enormous media attention and some fairly confident predictions from certain quarters that the relationship was over permanently. Those predictions turned out to be wrong. But the fact of the separation and the fact that they found their way back to each other after it seems to have been important in establishing the relationship on a footing that was chosen rather than assumed, deliberate rather than simply the path of least resistance. The years between St. Andrews and the announcement of their engagement in 2010 were years in which William was also working out, in a more formal way, what his life as a working royal was going to look like before he became king. He trained with the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst, was commissioned as an officer in the Blues and Royals, then transferred to the RAF, and trained as a search and rescue pilot, eventually serving operationally with the RAF Search and Rescue Force in Wales. This was not purely ceremonial military service of the kind that royal figures have historically performed without particularly distinguishing themselves. It was real work, with real stakes, involving real emergencies. He flew missions to rescue people from genuine peril, in conditions that were often dangerous and demanding, and by all available accounts, he was good at it, and took it seriously in a way that went well beyond the requirements of maintaining an image. The choice to pursue meaningful military service, and the choice to follow it with work as an air ambulance pilot in later years, reflects something consistent in William's character. A desire to do things that have actual consequences rather than purely symbolic significance. This is partly temperamental, a genuine preference for work that he can point to and say, this mattered, this made a difference. But it is also, almost certainly, a response to the particular challenge of his position. The challenge of being a person whose entire public significance is symbolic and anticipatory, whose importance derives from what he will one day be rather than from what he is doing right now. Finding work that has intrinsic value rather than purely representative value seems to have been, for William, an important way of maintaining a sense of himself as something more than just a waiting future monarch. The engagement to Catherine in October 2010 and the wedding in April 2011 were enormous global events, managed with the professional competence that the palace had developed over decades of staging such occasions, but also genuinely warmed by something that felt, to most observers, like real affection and real partnership. The relationship between William and Catherine has always had a quality of genuine mutual choice that distinguishes it from some of the romantic entanglements that previous generations of the royal family navigated. And that quality came through in the wedding. The vows sounded like they meant something. The expressions on both their faces looked like people who were happy to be there. In the context of the monarchy's recent marital history, which had included some very public and very painful failures, this was not nothing. The years of marriage before children arrived were years of relative quiet in public terms, years during which William and Catherine were building something private and stable that would serve as the foundation for everything that came after. The birth of Prince George in July 2013 was the first time William appeared in public as a father, and the photographs taken outside the Lindo wing of St. Mary's Hospital, deliberately echoing the photographs of Charles and Diana with the newborn William 31 years earlier in the same place, had a quality of deliberate historical continuity that was moving even to people who were not particularly invested in the monarchy. 3 generations of the direct line of succession, alive simultaneously, photographed in the same location, the same story continuing across time. Princess Charlotte arrived in May 2015 and Prince Louis in April 2018, and the family of 5 has been managed with a consistency of approach that reflects William and Catherine's shared commitment to protecting their children's privacy while also fulfilling the public expectations that come with their position. The children have appeared publicly at carefully chosen moments, on the steps outside the hospital after their births, at certain family occasions, in official photographs released to mark birthdays and other milestones. They have not been made into continuous public presences, not paraded before cameras at every opportunity, not turned into constant content for the media's insatiable appetite. This restraint is, in the context of the contemporary media environment, quite remarkable and quite deliberate, and represents a conscious decision by both parents about what kind of childhood they want their children to have. The death of Queen Elizabeth II in September 2022 changed everything, in the way that the death of a long-reigning monarch inevitably changes the structure of a family's relationship to the institution it represents. William became overnight the Prince of Wales, the heir apparent, the person whose accession to the throne moved from being a distant abstract possibility to something with genuine temporal proximity. His father was 73. The calculation was different now, more immediate, more present in daily life. And with the change in status came a change in the nature of public expectation and public scrutiny, a heightening of the attention paid to every decision and every appearance and every statement. What has been noticeable about William in the period since his father's accession is a greater willingness to step into the foreground, to take positions and make statements and engage with issues in ways that go slightly beyond the purely ceremonial and representative functions that the heir to the throne has traditionally confined himself to. The Earthshot Prize, an environmental initiative that William founded, and that awards significant prizes to people and organizations developing solutions to climate change and environmental degradation, has been one vehicle for this engagement. It is not a controversial initiative in the sense of being politically divisive, environmental concern being one of the few areas where genuine cross-spectrum consensus exists, but it is substantive in a way that goes beyond mere ribbon-cutting. It reflects genuine knowledge and genuine commitment to an area that William has cared about for a long time. The engagement with homelessness has been another area where William has shown a willingness to go deeper than the surface. He has spoken publicly and with what appears to be genuine emotion about the problem of rough sleeping, has met with homeless people and with the organizations that serve them in ways that went beyond the staged and managed encounters that royal engagements usually involve, has used his platform to draw sustained attention to an issue that is easy for comfortable people to look away from. Whether this kind of engagement translates into meaningful change is always an open question when it comes to the advocacy work of people in William's position. But the consistency and the apparent sincerity of the commitment suggests something more than performative concern. The most difficult period of William's life since his mother's death has been, almost certainly, the combination of his wife's serious illness and the deteriorating relationship with his brother, both of which have played out simultaneously and in painful parallel during the last couple of years. Catherine's cancer diagnosis in early 2024, the extended period of treatment, the gradual return to public life, has been a private ordeal experienced under public conditions, the worst of all possible combinations. William's management of this period, the decision to step back from some public duties to support his wife and children while also maintaining enough public presence to reassure people that the institution was still functioning, required a kind of judgment and balance that is genuinely difficult to exercise when you are simultaneously trying to be a worried husband and a present father and a working senior royal. The relationship with Harry and the very public nature of the estrangement between them has added another layer of pain to an already difficult period. The two brothers were, by many accounts, genuinely close during their childhoods and young adulthoods. They shared the experience of losing their mother in circumstances that no two other people on earth have shared. They supported each other through the long years of grief and public exposure that followed. The falling out between them, the causes of which are disputed and probably cannot be fully understood from outside the relationship, represents a significant personal loss for William at the same time as it represents an institutional complication for the monarchy. William's public response to the Harry situation has been notably restrained, certainly in comparison to what has come from the other side. He has not given interviews about it. He has not authorized leaks to the press about his version of events, or if he has, those leaks have been considerably less extensive and considerably more deniable than some of what has appeared to come from Harry's direction. This restraint is consistent with his general approach to managing the tension between private experience and public disclosure, an approach that clearly values privacy and discretion as ends in themselves rather than merely tactical choices. Whether this approach will eventually lead to reconciliation or whether it will allow the estrangement to harden into something more permanent is one of the genuinely open questions about the next chapter of the royal family's story. What kind of king will William be? It is the question that underlies everything else, the question that gives all the other elements of his story their significance. The honest answer is that nobody knows, including probably William himself, because the experience of being king is sufficiently different from any other experience that it is impossible to fully prepare for it or predict how it will shape the person who undergoes it. What can be said is that the person who will be king has been formed by a particular set of experiences that are unlike those of any previous monarch. He has known grief in the most public and painful way imaginable, and has found ways to carry it without being destroyed by it. He has built a marriage and a family that appear, from everything that can be known from outside, to be genuinely loving and genuinely stable, which is not nothing in a family with the royal family's recent marital history. He has done real work that has real consequences and has demonstrated that his commitment to public service is not purely ceremonial. He has navigated the almost impossible task of being simultaneously a private person and a public symbol, protecting what needs to be protected while also being present and engaged in the ways that his role demands. He has watched the institution he will lead face serious challenges and has seen at close range both the failures that happen when institutions refuse to adapt and the possibilities that open up when they find the courage to change. He has a clearer understanding than most previous heirs to the throne of the gap between what the monarchy says it is and what it actually needs to become, and he has shown, in certain moments, a willingness to push for the latter even when it creates friction with those who prefer the former. The road to the throne is, for William, a road that runs through everything that has already happened and everything that is still happening. It runs through his mother's arms and through her funeral and through the long work of grieving her. It runs through his marriage and his children and the family he has built with such evident care. It runs through the estrangement from his brother and the uncertainty about whether it can ever be repaired. It runs through his wife's illness and her recovery and the fear that any serious illness generates about the future. It runs through the environmental causes he cares about and the homelessness he cannot look away from and the Commonwealth relationships he will one day need to steward. All of it, every piece of it, is the preparation, not the preparation he was formally given, the tutors and the military training and the royal engagements and the institutional briefings. The real preparation, the preparation that will actually determine what kind of king he becomes, is the life itself. The losses and the love and the work and the grief and the conflict and the joy and the relentless, unceasing experience of being a human being who is also a symbol, who carries the weight of an institution and a history and a future that belong to him in a way that nothing else entirely does. He will be king. He has always known he will be king. And the person he has become on the long and complicated and sometimes very painful road to that destination is someone who might, when the moment finally arrives, be genuinely ready for it.